this morning. A man who has to be accurate, the Commissioner of Public Safety in the state of Mississippi, Sean Tindell, joins us right now. In what had to feel like a recurring nightmare, Friday and Saturday, call after call coming to DPS and law enforcement, shootings in Leland, Heidelberg, South Delta, Lorman, and then in Jackson as well. Mr. Commissioner, what a terrible weekend from a public safety, law enforcement standpoint, really across a bunch of communities in Mississippi.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, and we had such beautiful weather and a lot of reasons to be celebrating at these homecoming events. And it is very sad and deplorable that it turned and the senseless waste of life. And so it was a long weekend for law enforcement in these communities. And of course, our folks, the Department of Public Safety, MBI, MHP, Capitol Police, really all our divisions were all hands on deck trying to assist and do these local departments respond to these incidences.
I know at least the initial reporting is that these are unrelated. What's going on? It feels like more and more we are reading about shootings, people dying, and more times than not, it's young people. I know the age ranges for victims in this particular weekend spree kind of spreads between high teens or even a youth in Jackson up into the 40s, but it feels like more and more this is happening with younger people.
It is, and they're not related, but there is, I think, connections, right? And some of this is what's going on in these communities. And one of the things that I've been able to talk to sheriffs and chiefs about across the state in their communities is juvenile, and it's a big issue. I mean, we're seeing not just juvenile crime, but violence amongst juveniles with guns and firearms, and that's the response, not just the fight that you used to see after a football game 20 years ago, but now they're getting guns out. And, it's a big issue. And it's one of those things where law enforcement has to respond, but it's not going to solve the problem. We got to look into the homes that a lot of these young people are in. And then we've got to do something to create some accountability, even when they're those young teenagers, 14, 15 years old, and they're committing crime. And so if they're not dealt with at that age, then they go on to commit crimes like this and really endanger our entire communities. And you look at Leland, that wasn't just one shooter. That was a whole group that got into an argument, a fight, and then guns erupted in a crowd, and some bystanders were injured, as well as some of the gunmen themselves.
Do you believe, or can you say at this point whether or not the issue in Leland was gang related?
I can't say. Obviously there's probably some sort of nexus there, and what we're seeing on the gang front is it's not the traditions of the 90s and 80s. I mean, a lot of these are street level gangs, smaller groups that are affiliated with each other, and so in that respect, probably so. But it's not the Crips and the Bloods and the things of the past that we're used to seeing.
Yeah, I guess it was somewhat more simple when it was red bandanas and blue bandanas, and that was about all there was to figure out. But it certainly is more complex than that. I hesitate to mention this because I know the way people are going to react when I say it. I'm an advocate for Second Amendment rights. I know you are as well. I think most people in Mississippi are advocates for Second Amendment rights, the right to own and carry a firearm. Get that out of the way first. Do we have a gun problem in terms of accessibility, especially to young people?
I think there's a couple of issues. I mean, one, I don't know that we have a gun problem. We do have a responsible gun ownership problem in my mind. I mean, a lot of people have a lot of guns. I'm one of them. But leaving your gun in your car where it can get stolen is not a good idea. And I can't tell you how many of these weapons that we find, particularly in our stolen firearms. So if you're going to own a gun, you need to be responsible with it. You need to keep it on your person. You don't need to leave it in your car. and you need to make sure it's always secure. So I feel like, making sure that folks are responsible with their gun ownership is important. And then from a law enforcement standpoint, making sure that we can get these illegal guns off the streets. If it's a stolen firearm, it's illegal. They shouldn't have it. And trying to make sure that those that are convicted felons don't have firearms. Or if they're dealing drugs and they have a firearm, let's take the guns away from them. So there's all those components that go along with gun ownership that most of the time makes it right. I mean, there's it's one of the things I think that makes this country great. Is the Second Amendment, but there's a responsibility that comes along with that, much like freedom of speech. You can't yell fire in a movie theater, right? But freedom of speech is one of those core tenets of American principles that make this country great. And with rights come responsibilities, and we need to make sure that people are doing those correctly.
What is the level of frustration with law enforcement when it feels like, one step forward, two steps back? And maybe that's not a fair characterization, but it feels like there's so much work that has gone into public safety issues, to, like in the Jackson metro area, reducing the homicide rate. And we know that it's been a good year in terms of that level of focus, but only to see things like this popping up in different areas that aren't necessarily Jackson metro.
Well, and again, I think there's things that really need to be addressed in our communities. I pulled some stats and put them on our social media page a couple of weeks ago from the medical examiner's office, and it was interesting that if you were a white male and it was a suicide, that was about 80% of those were white males. 20% or so were black males. And then on the other side of the equation, if it was a homicide, African Americans were much more likely to be killed by homicide, 80%, compared to Caucasians was 20%. And so we've got a lot of issues in our state. We're talking about mental health, whether we're talking about safe neighborhoods, and all those things need to be put at the forefront. And again, I think law enforcement is put in the middle of all those things. And we need to look at it not just from a law enforcement standpoint, but what's happening in these homes, what's happening at the Department of Mental Health. I think been a good job there recently trying to make improvements. Child Protection Services, Andrea Sanders has been trying to do a lot to get these kids out of these bad homes. And until we start making significant strides in those arenas, I think those numbers are still going to stay high, even though we might start seeing some reductions.
We've seen the National Guard conversation pop up in multiple states, multiple cities, mostly in larger cities so far under the Trump administration. Governor Reeves has talked about Jackson in particular and saying, not sure that we need that right now, but I'm certainly open to the possibility if it feels like the need arises. When you look at this issue of deploying the National Guard to cities within the United States, I know there are lots of reasons for trepidation. Is it a net good, net gain?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think anytime you can make step forwards, it's a net gain. And I do think that there are some good short-term results, type of saturation. But I think long-term, what we need to see more of is communities committed to public safety. I was pleasantly surprised in Cleveland, Mississippi, a town of about 10 or 11,000 people. They have 47 full-time officers. They have a starting salary of $61,000 for those officers. Had a homicide in 18 months. That is a community that has committed itself to public safety by hiring good officers and hiring a lot of them. And it's made the streets of Cleveland safer than some of the other towns in that same region. So I think every community leader, and state leader for that matter, needs to take a strong public safety, the number of officers we have in our communities, and making sure they're paid a salary that's commensurate with the level of professionalism that they need and the demands of the job. And I think when you do that, you get those good results. I mean, look at what Sheriff Togel's doing up in DeSoto County and the communities up there that have committed themselves to public safety. There's over 900 local law enforcement officers in DeSoto County. There's a reason why the law-abiding citizens of Memphis are moving to DeSoto County. It's safe. They're keeping that criminal element out of there. Same thing in Madison and Rankin County. Same thing in Harrison County. Those committees, those counties, and those cities that commit them to public safety have good results, and we need more of that in some of these other towns.
I hate the idea of just throwing money at a problem and hoping it'll go away, but those resources are certainly vital to growing those police forces and law enforcement communities. Commissioner Tindell, always appreciate your time. Hopefully this is a better news week than this past weekend was.
We'll keep our fingers crossed and prayers open. Thank you.
Thank you. Sean Tindell, Commissioner of the Department of Public Safety here in Mississippi, recapping what was a rough weekend and trying to talk about some of the solutions that he sees that make sense going forward. We're back with you. It's Mornings with Richard Cross, SuperTalk, Mississippi.